call the budget workshop to order at 6:08. And we have some information, we had some questions the last time. Do you want to go over that, or
Sure.
how should we?
Sure, yeah. Before I start, this budget process is very, very challenging. Probably more so when you have a business manager who's only been here 9 or 10 weeks and who is incredibly needy and asks a lot of questions and bugs you over and over again for answers. This budget doesn't happen without a lot of hard work from a lot of people. From the superintendent's office, from Regina to the principals and their administrative staff and all their teachers, everybody in the business office, Tina and Sue, everybody has put a tremendous amount of work into this budget. And on top of that, you've all been very generous with your time and wisdom. So honestly, thank you very much for all the help that you've given me over the past 9 or 10 weeks so we could get to this point. So thank you. Posted in the agenda minutes are several folders. I put together a small PowerPoint presentation, about 9 or 10 slides, to address some of the questions that were asked on Monday's budget meeting. The spreadsheets are there for your review. If you want to understand where I got some of the numbers from the presentation, you're more than welcome to open up those Excel spreadsheets and look through them. But we have a couple of options in terms of how we go. And just want to explore both of those options, and we'll talk about the pros and cons in both, and then we'll make a decision and we'll move forward with our budget. So
Is that this one here,
it's the PowerPoint. I can't see that.
yeah, they're all PDFs, so there we go. You only need to click on it once.
All right. So if we go to the first slide, I thought we'd kind of start at the beginning, kind of start slow. We'll move through these slides to where we are. So at the beginning of this process, the state asks us to take a look at a bunch of different things. They have a very complex formula, and they basically help us determine the tax cap levy for the school district. In this particular year, we've had a couple of choices. It's a unique year because we're ending a capital project, and we have to pay for that project. And how we're going to pay for that project is basically we're going to issue a bond. All right. Now, because of the timing of the issue, we have an opportunity to pay it in 2 different fiscal years. We can pay it at the end of the fiscal year 21-22, or at the beginning of 22-23. And depending on when we pay that bond, the timing of the payment, it's going to affect the amount of revenue that's the school district is going to receive. If we pay it in June, we're going to go out basically at 0%, and the revenue numbers show that basically the tax base is going to be about $5.2 million. If we go out in July, that's going to push us into a negative tax cap levy, which means the revenue generated from taxpayers is going to be about $4.99 million. Okay. All right, so what does that mean? So let's do a little analysis. So again, the capital project's ending, as I just said. We can have a June payment, which will be applied to the 21-22 fiscal year, July payment to the 22-23. We talked about the different tax cap levies that we'll be able to apply depending on which timing we choose. And we talked about the different amounts that we'll be able to look at. If we do pay in July, and again, this is just one part of it, there are pros and cons. One of the disadvantages is that we're going to lose about $231,000, almost $232,000 in revenue with the July payment. Okay. Now, when we have a negative tax cap, those reductions are residual, meaning there's a compounding effect, meaning that if we go out if we pay it June, then our tax base starts at that $4.99 million. So what I did is I put together a little scenario here. So let's just say if we go out in June, and we, we're to leave the bond, basically leave if we go out in June, our revenues would be $5.233 million. And let's just say we go out in June and we leave those, we leave that money out there for 22, 23, and 23, 24, right? We can do that. If we go out in June and we don't raise taxes for the next 2 years, that's gonna be our tax revenue. Now, if we pay in July, and these numbers can change based on the valuations and stuff like that, but I'm trying to impress upon everyone that if we go out in July, and we raise taxes at 1.5%, I wanted to show you the numbers that we're gonna look at. If we go out at 1.5% and we pay the bond in July, our tax base is only $5.066 million, which is $157,000 less than if we went out in June and didn't raise taxes. If we go out another year to 22, 23, 24, our tax base is only $5.142 million. And the reason why I'm showing this is that if we go out in June, if we go out in July, even if we raise taxes at 1.5%, we still won't get to the tax base that we are today. So we're going to see a reduction in revenue.
Just 1 second.
Yes.
I don't think this is being shared in the meeting. So I just want to make sure people who are calling in can be with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's not being shared at all.
How's that?
All right, so this is the slide that I was kind of just discussing. And again, the basis of this slide is to show you that, a reduction in the tax cap has a residual effect. It has a compounding effect. And if you were to lower it, if we were to go out in July, it would lower our revenues for 2021, 2022, but also for 22, 23, and 23, 24. And that's all this is trying to show. And again, there's some pros and cons to going out both ways. I just want to provide everybody with all the information I can possibly think of so that we can make the best choice for everyone. So does anybody have any questions here?
So what if we went out in July, but asked the taxpayers to go above the tax cap and came back to 1.95, some amount?
You can do that.
What does that do residually?
If you're going to, it's still going to be a decrease in revenues. Now, is it going to be as drastic if you go from 4.3 to 2? Is it going to be as drastic? No, but there's still going to be a residual effect, and it's going to be a negative effect. It becomes, and again, it's if I was to go out 24, 25, 25, 26, that's the year that we would probably break even. So these effects are going to have residual effects. Anytime that you go out at a negative tax cap, it affects revenues in a negative way. Now, I'm not getting into any philosophical conversations, but that's just how the numbers roll out.
So it doesn't impact, if we did go out in negative, if we went in July, but then asked the voters to not actually be negative, right? We could do that, right? It'd be an increase.
It's just based on the levy. So really, that number, once we have it, we don't look at that again. You just plug in what you use as your tax levy. But then also, we would have the capital tax credit because we would be able to claim the building, debt in the next cycle. So I think we'd be pretty close if we looked at how we would do that. Because the formula takes just the levy. It doesn't take into effect the tax cap that you had.
That you actually got, yep.
Right.
Okay.
Because if you take a look at this, we have the maximum allowable levy, and you need that in order to figure out, whether you need majority or whatever. But we only use 1.95, and that doesn't come into the formula at all.
At all.
It goes directly from what you levy. So how sensitive is this? Because that number, 5,220,000, doesn't match the number that we set as a levy.
So what number are you looking at again?
5,229.
The actual top line, prior year tax levy.
Can you, yeah, so
Because
These numbers are, can you put up the tax cap levy, Dave? The spreadsheet, here we go. So, when you look at 2021, the prior year tax levy, that's generated from the state. This formula is generated at the state ed website, and again, it starts out for 2021 with that particular number. Now, there are things that come in and out of that, so that's not going to exactly match. Every number that you see here in the tax cap levy is a result of some type of formula that the state has you go through. So basically, it may not match up exactly, but they're not. It isn't just as simple as pulling in 6 or 7 numbers. That number has.
That does have to do with the reserves too, so how you use those, so but it didn't
Right.
delineate what you were using.
Right, and this is the tax cap information that goes directly into the state website. And once we went through the formula has about 7 different parts, and every one of those parts has about 7 different parts to it. It's a very complicated equation to kind of work through. It took us about 2 weeks to compile these numbers, just to kind of dig through and take out what they asked us to take out and add that in what we have to. But you know, myself, Lynn, and Tina went over these numbers, and you know, we're pretty confident that on the 2 scenarios, this is exactly the maximum amount of tax levy we would have if we went on in June versus July. All right. So the tax cap analysis continued. I think when we look at, I think we just talked about that. All right, fantastic. So now we've talked about some of the negatives. Let's talk to some of the positives. When we look at the capital project analysis, Fiscal Advisors has given us a sheet, and while it was not the way they explained it to me a couple months ago, let me rephrase that. The way I understood it a couple of months ago isn't necessarily the way I should have understood it. So when we look, if we make the payments in June, the total payments are going to total about $16.6 million. If we pay it in July, the total payments, meaning what we're going to pay on the bond, is going to be about $16.53 million. So there's a difference, a positive difference of about $129,000. Now, what the project costs is different than what we get aided. Now, every time we make a payment, we receive payments from state aid, and we have a portion of that money that we're going to have to pay. So I wanted to look at the portion that we're going to be responsible for. And again, if we make the payment in July, we're responsible, when you add up all the different payments, we're responsible for about $1.046 million. And if we make the payment in June, we're responsible for about $1.75. So from a capital project perspective, we do save about $128,000, almost $129,000 by paying the project in July versus June. But that savings is also offset by a reduction in revenue.
But
Yes.
I was thinking about that, but we will get 15 opportunities to use this capital debt in budgets. Now, it won't be on my watch 15 years from now, but that board will have a year in which they won't have debt, but they can take the capital debt in the, right? In the formula.
I'm not quite sure
Because we can't take it this year, we will have 15 opportunities to carry this debt into our tax cap computations.
Yeah, this is
Somewhere, we will come out with a balance. We're not gonna lose a year because it's been paid off. They'll be able to, in the last year, the school district will have the opportunity to use that capital debt in their in their tax cap formula. So we either use it the first year or the last year.
Go ahead to the next slide. So now we talked about how it affects revenues. Let's talk about how it affects the budget. Now, because we are taking, essentially what we're doing is we're taking the principal for the first year, and instead of paying it in 21-22, we're pushing the principal off to 22-23. So that means that we're going to see a jump in expenses. Basically, if we pay it in June, the portion to us per year ranges from $60,000 to $70,000. So that's our responsibility after the state aid comes in. Once we push it out to July, because we're pushing that principal payment out, our personal responsibility about doubles. It comes up to about 130 to 140,000. It fluctuates year after year. So we are going to, while we're going to save money that first year, it's not a savings. We're just deferring those payments out to future years and kind of splitting them up, breaking them up over a couple of years. But the amount that we're responsible kind of doubles. So the June payments, when we look at our budgets, the expenses and revenues are about $15,631,000. And it's a 10.68% change. Now, if we make the July payment, what happens to our budget? Well, we take we take the principal out of that budget for this particular year, and our expenses drop to about $14.652 million. And the percent change in budget from previous year goes down to about 3.75%. So again, this reduction isn't that we're eliminating any expenses, we're just moving them from one fiscal year to another. And again, the July payment will force us to use less fund balance because our expenses are going to be lower, we're going to need less revenues, and we're going to end up with a little extra money, which isn't a bad thing. We've got some places we could maybe put it, but that's just one of the side effects, not necessarily a bad thing.
Why would a July payment force us to use less fund balance?
Because our expenses are down, so we don't have to come up with, in the June payment, we have to come up with $15.631 million, where July, we only have to come up with $14.65 because of the reduction in the principal we're paying. It's all, the changes are strictly in debt services. If we don't, if we make a June payment, that means we're paying about almost $900,000 more in principal. If we push the payment off into July, that goes into the next fiscal year, so that next year's 21-22 budget is going to be less.
One of the things that happens, and I'm not following you, so I'm just trying to talk it through so that I
Okay,
understand.
sure.
That if we make the payment in July,
Yes.
we will have some debt service that we will have to pay. We don't meet the threshold for capital tax, but we will also receive $708,000 in additional state aid. That wouldn't go towards
Yep,
that,
the state-
that debt service that year.
Correct, right.
Is there some way that can be committed or whatever to then, over the life of the bond, to be used to offset the local share?
Well, what happens here is if we make a June payment, the payment's made on June 30th, if we have to make a bond payment. If we make a July payment, it's July 1st. It's a difference of a day.
Right, but it changes the money, so.
It changes the money, but here's the thing, when the money that we get from the state and state aid in 2021, 2022 would probably have to be earmarked for that July 1st payment, because when we make the payment July 1st, we won't get the aid until after we make the payment.
But it will still be aid,
It will
so.
still be aid, but we may have, my issue becomes cash flow at that point in time. And I reached out to fiscal advisors yesterday and I hadn't heard back. When is the time, if we make a payment July 1st of, $1.2 million, how long do we have to wait before the state gives us that particular money back? So it could potentially be a cash flow problem. And yeah, we do receive the aid, and that aid is reflected in the revenue under there in the July payment. We are considering, we're going to get that state aid, whether we make the payment in June or July. Both scenarios, we get the state aid.
Right. But what I'm asking is if we receive in excess $708,000
Yep.
in the state aid, in the building aid,
Yep.
is there a way to commit that money so that we would have access to that to pay the bond over the life of the loan? So if you took that and you figured out, you committed that money and you set it up and said X number of dollars per year for the life of the bond
Right.
to offset the local share.
Yep. So that.
Can we do that?
We can, but now that means we have to take more refund. So when we look at the revenues in the June payment and July payment, the revenues include that payment. So if we want to earmark that payment and not use it for our general fund, we will then have to take more of our fund balance out to recoup that. At the end of the day, we need $14.65 million in revenues to pay for our expenses. If we earmark that $700,000+,
Mhm.
that means we have to replace it with something else to pay our expenses.
But it's building aid, so what
Yes.
I'm saying is that,
Building aid comes through foundation aid, it's part of, it's part of building aid, it's built into our revenue stream. So when we look at all the different revenue pieces, that piece is built in.
that's not my understanding of building aids. That's,
Yeah, building aid in itself is a separate line item.
right,
Separate line
I
item.
think in where they, if the board appropriated that revenue into the reserve fund, right, there's a debt reserve fund
Yeah.
we have available to us, then in future years, you could say, just that $702,000 could say, we're going to appropriate the I think it's a $60,000 payment every year, that comes out thereafter, depending on, 60 or 156, depending on your year. That the board could say, we're going to allocate X number of dollars out of this reserve to pay for the debt service.
and that's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
I don't think we can use the debt service, because the debt service is funded by monies that are left over
Yeah,
from any building project, so I don't think that that's something that might not be available to us, but we can commit, and
Yeah.
we can commit money, and that
Yeah.
means board action to commit it, and then board action to spend it, and we could actually amortize that $708,000 over
Right.
the bond, so that each year, a certain amount would be coming, so that we can offset the higher local share if we took the bond in July. So I'm just
But-
trying to be clear about how we can
But
use
that's
that
kind of
money.
the same thing that paying it in June does. If we pay it in June,
Oh, no, not in my mind.
Okay, right.
Not in my
so,
mind.
so the revenue, so we get more building aid than just from this capital project. We receive
Absolutely.
building aid. All that money we'll receive for previous capital projects and the money aid that we're
Mhm.
expecting is in that 14.652 revenue number. So if we take the $700,000 out, we reduce revenues by that much, which means we've got to come up with another $700,000 to replace that earmark.
But we would have to anyway.
What's that?
We would have to anyway, because if we paid the bonds in June, we'd still have to come
Right.
up with $65,000.
Right, that's-
So it's pretty much close to me for a wash, the extra money. So we would have to come up with that.
We go next slide?
yes. Go to the next slide. Go to the next slide. Next slide.
So let's look at our 3-year projection. So we know what's going to happen to our expenses. We know what's going to happen to our revenues. How is this going to affect us over the next 3 years? So at the end of the day, our expenses stay the same. We've run a 3-year budget projection. We've made some assumptions, and that spreadsheet is built into the pack. We've looked at expenses going up 2%. So we've kept all the expenses except debt services the same. So we're trying to compare apples to apples. And if we look at the 2023 budget paying in June, again, when we look at the 2022-2023 budget paying in June, we're looking at about 15.915. If we kick it out, we're looking at 15.981, or basically about a $66,000 increase. And that kind of makes sense because we're not, because we're deferring the principal, we're going to come up with about $60,000 more in expenses. Okay, so we're going to basically, we're increasing our expenses, decreasing our revenues. Now, the changes in 23-24 is about the same. We're looking at about $61,000 in additional expenses by paying in July versus June. If we look at the budget increase, if we look at the 3-year average, June payment sees an average budget increase of about 5%. A July payment is about 5.1%. All right, now here's where the big change comes in. We are, when we do our 3-year projections, we're looking at, significant budget gaps. So when we look at the budget gaps for the 22-23 year, the budget gap in June, if we pay in June, the budget gap we're anticipating for 22-23 is about 1.132 million. If we do it in 2023, our budget gap jumps 1.434, and it's about a $300,000 gap, and that is the combination of the decrease in revenues and an increase in expenses. When we look at it for 23-24, the budget gap again, looking at about another $300,000 budget gap difference, meaning we're going to have a $300,000 larger budget gap by paying in July than June. So over the next 2 years alone, we're looking at an increased budget gap of about $602,000 that we're going to have to fund.
And that's based on no changes and just rolling over.
And all the expenses staying the same, the only changes are in debt services. Yep. And, you know, when we look at our revenues, we've got about $600,000 additional budget gap we're gonna have to cover. And we look at the changes of the fund balance, basically from June or July payment, we end up with about $76 additional thousand in our fund, in our total reserves. So our total reserves will go up $76,000 to cover $600,000 in additional future budget gaps.
That I have is the last slide.
And that's all that I have. So I tried to look at it, how it affects revenues, how it affects expenses, how it affects us today, and how it affects us tomorrow.
And at some point, we have to talk about the elephant in the room, that there is $1,667,000 in change that we carried over from last year's budget. We have to be able to craft a budget with appropriating those funds fiscally, in a fiscally sound way, to get a budget that allows us to keep the tax levy low, stable, and still make those adjustments. We can cover those gaps that you're identifying if we are careful about how we use that money that is currently not appropriated. So I do think that it is important that we have this part of the conversation. What are we going to do with that money? Because it does impact, I think, what we're talking about here as far as moving forward with the tax levy. Because that money has come from Salem taxpayers. It's already here, it's already collected. They're trusting us to make good choices and how we're going to use this money. And I think that it's critical that we incorporate appropriating that money so that it has the biggest bang for the buck.
In the budget that we had put together before we had this discussion, right now with a June payment, we're using about $1 million of unassigned fund balance to cover our expenses. And at the end of the day, it'll leave us with about $623,000 in unrestricted fund balance, which puts us right at the 4% cap, which is the maximum allowable. So we do have money in other reserve accounts. And I know, you know, some of those should be funded the way they are. I know there's ERS, which is a little bit overfunded, but, you know, while we have a lot of money in fund reserves, you know, we're restricted on how we can use it and when we can use it, and quite honestly, you know.
But that $1,667,000 is not restricted in any way. We have to deal with that. We cannot go through another cycle in which we have not done something with that money. We have to identify a plan as to how we're going to, the auditors will not be happy with us if we do not address that money. So if we have a plan and we commit the money in different places, I think, you know, we can make the argument that, you know, we're working with that money.
And I know we had talked about a capital project reserve, which I think is very wise to use some of those monies. And we have a couple of funds that maybe could be a little bit more reserved. You know, one of the, you know, we're in a very, very good time right now. We are seeing state aid at record amounts. And, you know, talking to my colleagues and people, they've never seen the amount of money we have right now, and there's skepticism if it's going to continue. So, and again, you know, I'm not trying to persuade the conversation either way. I know that everybody here has we all have the best interests of the school district at heart. But, you know, we have we're in a good position. And we can make the payment, and, you know, I just.
Yes, we can.
Yes, and I worry about, you know, the uncertain future, so that's.
Oh, I understand.
Yeah.
But another question I have is when we take a look at the state aid, if you take a look at the state aid runs, that's that $8,713,000. But if they turn on the tap for the building aid, that's $1,045,000. So where is that, and how does that come into this revenue side?
All the building aid coming from the state aid website is built into our revenue system, whether it's basic aid, if it comes from state aid, transportation aid, that's all built into our revenue. So everything that this,
But this is new. The new line for building aid, $1,045,000 based on this, closing out this project. They don't know that we're going to do that.
so we're building,
gonna tell
building
them.
aid on the state website right now is about $600,000. So what we did is we worked with fiscal advisors. They looked at the number that the state currently has posted. And then what they did is they figured out what we were going to get in additional building aid if we close out this capital project.
Addition.
And then fiscal advisors put it together and gave us the number to use in our revenue. So the numbers that we use in our revenue includes the existing numbers that are on the state website, as well as the projected or anticipated state aid that we're going to get next year when we close out this project. Right now, the state doesn't know about it. So on the state website, the building aid isn't quite as high as it is in our revenue projections. We talked to fiscal advisors. They said, here's what the state says. Once we give the state the information that we completed the project, here's what we anticipate our revenue will be for next year. So this is the number that we're going to use in our budget. So that number is already being used in our current revenue stream, whether we pay in June or July. So that's,
So you're saying to me, if I go on the New York State Education website
Yep.
and I put in Salem and I
Yep.
look for the proposed state aid, well, the state aid that we are now going to get,
yep,
it will be $1,045,000 less than
it will
$8
be,
million?
yes, it will be significantly less, yes.
So it's less than last year?
It's, the only building aid that we are receiving from the
I'm talking
state,
about total state aid.
total state aid?
Yeah, that's what you've lumped it into on the revenue side.
So total state aid is bumped into a lot of different, we have a foundation aid that we get, this is the base of it. Then we have, transportation aid, which is what we've, our expenses last year are paid back at some factor, whereas building aid. The building aid number in the state budget, right now on the website, is lower than what we're projecting in our revenues here. And that's because they don't know that we're gonna complete the project, but we do. So fiscal advisors has put together that revenue number for us. And they said, okay, here's the number that the state thinks that they're supposed to pay you. After we fill in the paperwork, here's the number that you're gonna get from the state, and that's the number that we use.
So there's no additional.
No, there's not, there's nothing coming. And then what we did is we looked at our revenues, and we looked at our unallocated fund balance. Understand we had a lot of money. We're, planning to use $1.43 million in unassigned fund balance to cover the revenue, the budget gap this year. And if we do that, we're gonna end up with about $623,000 in unrestricted fund balance.
And how
So
much money will be carry over from this budget?
we don't know until we get our final revenue numbers in and we get our final expenses in, because we still have,
Ballpark figure.
there may be, I don't anticipate us to use everything, so there may be $1 million.
Okay, because currently, in the last condition of accounts, it was over 2 million, and I know that that's not gonna hold.
Yeah, that's not gonna hold, yes. But I think conservatively, $1 million would be, now that we're bringing back everybody full-time and bus drivers, that number is gonna go down a little bit, which is fantastic to have the kids back in school, but yeah, I could see $1 million, and I know we talked about putting together capital projects and stuff like that. It's hard to say, it's hard, to,
Well, there's your $1 million in fund balance. It come from money that you are anticipating because we have not spent all that was appropriated. No, not okay, there it is. So we can't say that, we're gonna use up all of that money that was carryover from last year's budget. If we're gonna carry over an additional $1 million from this one.
I'm not saying we are, I'm just saying that.
I asked you ballpark, and I'm not gonna hold you to it.
No,
But if we carry over $1 million, if we have in excess of this year,
Yep.
that fund balance can be used to offset next. So, I understand that number, and, I wholeheartedly agree that that number should come down, because there are things I think that we can take care of as we go forward into next year, but we still have that additional money. So I'm wondering, we're looking at what can happen if we make that payment in July. We have an option. We can go out and ask the voters to keep it status, but right now, last year, we applied over $465,000 to the levy to bring it down. with the new tax cap, we would be below that number. So we wouldn't really need to add any more to lower the tax levy, because we've already done that. And so that's another $465,000 that we used last year that will come out of that 817. So I do think there's a way for us to look at this, and we should be able to come out with a budget that keeps us, in a good spot and puts the money in all the appropriate places. And, I know we have to make a decision about when to pay it, but we do have revenue that, that's unassigned, and it can cover those budget gaps if we're nervous about.
In between 22, 23 and 22, 24, there's almost $3 million in budget gaps. With,
You
again,
said
it's-
600,000.
well, it's the difference between the two is about 600,000, so yes, we can do that.
I'm just saying, I think we need to lay all our cards on the
Yeah.
table, and we cannot forget that we have this money, and we must, use it.
As long as the state aid remains flat. And that's the big wild card. If the state aid doesn't remain flat, if the revenue projections from the state this year don't come in the way they think they do, and you see a reduction in state aid, because again, we've got record amounts of money this year. And I'm not trying to persuade the equation, there's a lot of risk involved. We know what we have today, we never know what we have tomorrow. So we could have we could be in a fantastic, you're right, you're absolutely right, we could be in a fantastic position next year or the year after, but we may not be.
Wish we had the crystal ball, I guess.
Always, always.
So when you were looking at this, and you did your budget summary
Yep,
for the bond payment in June and the bond payment in July,
yes.
when you used fund balance and other, they were different. So it's not apples to apples.
When I
anymore.
used fund, I don't understand. Okay,
Okay.
yes,
If you take a look here,
yep,
what you used in fund balance,
yep,
if you're gonna pay it in July, and if you're gonna pay it in June.
yeah,
Use
so
different numbers.
if we pay it in June, we have more expenses. So we're gonna need more fund balance to cover those additional expenses. And that's gonna come from the unadjusted, but if we pay it in July, then we don't need more fund balance in the 21, 22, but we're gonna need to use it in 22, 23. So it's just shifting back and forth. What we're doing is we're taking expenses from one year, moving it to the next, and we're moving fund balance in the opposite direction to cover the changes in expenses and revenues.
What is other?
Other is revenues, those are your interest revenues, that type of stuff.
Okay. And that's gone down.
Yeah.
And so, Ann, to your point, I think we do have a couple of reserve opportunities for that 1.7. To there, no. We have to take spare money that work to offset it for future pieces. I just quickly pulled up, the sheet that Mr. Hales had given us.
Yep.
To look, I would, we need a little more homework, but on this first blush read of the mandatory reserve for debt service, it looks like there's some freedom in there to allow us to use that as a reserve.
The mandatory reserve fund is not for schools.
Yeah, that
That's
would,
according to what John Hill wrote.
and I'm looking at the New York State Department of Education, University, whatever, that's on their list.
Yes, it is. It is their list, but John's notes indicate that we can't access that as a school
Well,
district.
we'll double check that,
That's fine.
to make sure, to have that available. If it's not available,
you
There's
know,
gotta be other
and
other,
yes, you're right, and I
Yeah.
don't mean to interrupt you, but I do think it needs to go into summer reserves, and I do think some of that money needs to be used to fund the capital reserve. But I also think that we have asked the voters, and they have given us all of this money, and I do think that we need to be mindful to keep those taxes as even as we possibly can.
Yes.
So the idea of creating a situation for which we could go out and ask money, get more money, doesn't mean that we have to or we should. So for me, if we have the money that the taxpayers have already given to us, I think it's imperative that we use that money to craft a budget that keeps their tax levy as
So-
stable as we can.
so your perspective, just to see if I can tie that to our current question. So your perspective is that because we already have those funds, it would be, to have the payment be in July?
Yeah, I do think that the payment should be in July, if you ask
Yeah.
me, payment in July.
Yeah.
And actually, in looking at the numbers and what we have, I would be happy with the negative tax cap number. I do know that there are ripples out for people, but that would lower people's taxes. We would give them a break over the next couple of years. We have money that they've already paid in. If we use it wisely, we should be able to get to the other side of those 3 years till we break even and are in a different place. So, that, if you
that's
ask me
the
where my
thought.
plan
Okay.
was, there it is. So, I will ask, and I do think that to have that kind of additional money and then go out and ask for a tax increase, I don't support that.
Well, I think we're going out flat this year. I don't think
Yeah.
that's for a tax.
But also, you're talking about, well, we're gonna lose revenue, but that's only potential revenue if we were to raise the tax cap, or raise the tax levy. So it's not really, we're not losing it until we can't access it, and we haven't gone up to the full tax cap numbers up till now. I mean, last budget, we could have used 5 something, and we used less than 2.
Mhm.
So I think we've tried to keep it as stable as we can, but we have this anomaly. I mean, it won't ever happen again that we have all of this extra money
Right.
that was collected and not used because the school was closed. So I do think that they've already given it to us. I think that we need to use that
Mhm.
going forward to kind of get everybody through, keep it as stable as we can.
We get it.
So it's not,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to cut the budgets or anything, I'm just saying
No.
use those things
Right.
wisely.
I was just trying to catch up to where your brain was. I'm there now. I'm there now.
So that's my perspective. So I'm just trying to understand, and that is my perspective and it's my bias, so I understand that. So when you hear my questions, there it is.
And I agree with you, and I agree that if we have extra money, we should definitely return it back to the taxpayers. I would like to know more what's gonna happen after this record year of money from the state. Because I would hate to, and I'm not trying to get into a philosophical conversation, because I understand.
Oh, I
I'm
understand
from a
what
small
you're
town of
saying.
Waterford, I pay my school taxes, and I know, I know people are struggling, and I understand that we have a fiduciary duty to use their money wisely, and I respect that.
But you're saying to us that the biggest increase is in the debt service. And if we can use the monies that we currently already have in hand, because we have the carryover from different budget years,
Sure.
to help us get through the debt service gap,
Yep.
then I think that's, for me, a reasonable way to use that money, because all other things are even. And if we're going up and building a budget based on the tax cap, once we get to a place where the building capital, and once we're putting that into the formula, we're going to normalize that tax cap formula, then, those are the opportunities to grow programs and other things. It's just getting us through the time where we get through this step system to get into the payments for the tax cap, or for the capital project, excuse me. And if we can do it and come out on the other end, Yes, we may not get as much money in taxes so we may consider it lost revenue, but we have existing monies that we can use to get us to that other side. That's my point. So I don't have a problem with expenditures. That's not my issue. It's how we're going to pay for it. So I don't know what anybody else thinks. I had my mouth almighty, I guess. But I've been thinking about it a lot
Yes.
and looking at it. Because, I do think your bias is for us to pay it in June. So I'm sort of looking at why we,
I don't have
Well-
I don't have a bias per se. I mean, I present everybody run the numbers and present the numbers, and then, we can discuss it. It's not a bias. I respect. There's a lot of different ways to look at a lot of different things. So I don't necessarily have a bias. I worry.
So what are people's thoughts? Heidi, how about you?
I mean, I think, Ann, you've done a ton of research on this. I guess I don't have a strong feeling either way. But I don't know. I guess I can't collect my thoughts at the moment. It's just a lot of information.
Sorry to put you on the spot, but,
No worries.
I don't, when you take a look at the expenditure side, I think that those are reasonable numbers based on where we are and where we should be. But I do, when we go out to the voters and we're gonna ask them to, approve the budget.
Yep.
Of course, what's included in there is how many tax dollars we're gonna ask them for. And I think that's, for me, the real crux of this conversation is how are we going to fund paying the expenditures?
Yeah, I mean, I think at any point when we can save the taxpayers' money, I think that's always a positive.
And the money that we have in hand is not state aid money, it's not federal money, it's already money that was,
Right.
been provided by taxpayers, so combination thereof, I guess.
There's numbers on either side of this equation that make me nervous.
Okay, what are they?
It's, the negative tax levy never makes me nervous. Not insurmountable, but as long as we understand what we're walking into,
Right.
that makes me nervous. On the other side of it, it is the 10.69% increase in the budget. Makes me nervous. All very explainable, all very upfront, all there. It's still a 0% on the tax levy, but that it's still, and I think we talked a little bit about this last time, was that upward pressure on the budget to jump 1.5 million or jump that number.
Yep.
Is a big jump, especially when you look at over our past few budgets over the past few years. It's generally been around plus or minus $600,000 is where it tended to fall. So when you talk double that, that's a big jump. So it's paying it off early keeps that tax levy request a little more even, because we went out at 0 and we've been under 2% for multiple years with multiple 0% over the past few years. But like kind of to Heidi's point, I don't think anyone's going to look at, hey, look, they're giving us tax money back and say bad. Do that, or to recognize that the board has the interest of, we have this money already here, we're going to use that to fill in, and then it's just being prudent, because we know that cliff's coming in 3 years.
Right.
But when the federal money goes and that's there, that we are
federal money's
prepared.
not here.
Yeah.
That federal money is
No,
nowhere in
the
these
federal
numbers.
money's not here, but we may have people
Mhm.
and in there and just making sure,
We need to be prudent with
yeah,
how
we
we
need
use
to,
those money.
and when we're looking at that planning, right, and that 3-year planning out, we just always have to keep that in mind, that 3 years out, some of this money's gonna go away, and we need to be ready for it, so the cliff is more like a hill for us. And as long as we do that, I think we'll be okay.
So are you saying that that cliff would be more like a hill if, with one of these scenarios versus the other?
No. What I'm saying is whichever one we take, we just have to keep that in mind in our future planning.
Right, well, in 3 years, we're gonna level out, we're gonna be back in an even situation
Mhm.
with the capital tax and how much,
Mhm.
you know.
And, you know, yeah, we reduced that 10% down to 3, but that comes back next year.
And that's,
At
and,
9%.
yes, so that's either way, so we're,
But now it's,
Ann's suggestion is we're gonna use the fund balance to fill that hole because it's already, we've pre-taxed people in air quotes, right, to fill that in. But that means we have that much less fund balance available to us because it's gonna get expended. And we just have to keep that in mind.
But if we have, as Mr. Lay suggests, about $1 million that will be at the end of this budget,
Yep.
that's typically the ballpark for each budget. So we are not ahead or behind as far as that's concerned. And if you're explaining it, and I'm understanding what you're explaining, is that the difference is only in the debt service. And if we are able to bridge the gap using some of that carryover money that we have, then I think that's something that we need to explore.
That either way, just, I don't even know what 3 years from now is. What is it, 24, 25? To there, just 20, the fiscal 25 or the fiscal 26 budgets are ones to keep in our brain.
Unfortunately, we don't have a crystal ball to see what that's gonna look like, so we just have to do our best planning to go forward from here.
Yeah, it's, yeah.
So it boils down for me to plan for that carryover money that we
Yep.
have. And do you think that is possible?
yeah, I think once we decide if we're gonna pay in June or July, we can, get this part of that going. And then we will, finish out the budget. We'll take a look at where the reserves shake out. And then we can start saying, okay, here are the anticipated reserves, I think what we wanna do with them.
Okay, and just, what, the fiscal advisors assumes that we're going to pay in July. So they say assumed borrowing schedule.
Yeah, I just had a neat conversation with them this morning, and they haven't made an assumption. They asked
Oh,
me,
okay.
they want to make sure that we're still continuing to issue the bond in which choice do we want to make, so.
Okay.
Again, their only interest is to which way to write the numbers. They don't have a vested interest either way.
Well, it would make a difference to me to know that we can make a plan to use that additional money that would come in as building aid, and actually, capture that in some sort of account, whether it's committed,
Yeah.
however
Well,
we do it.
we have a reserve plan. I don't know when the last time we looked at it was. It might have been a couple of years.
Last time it was reviewed.
And it might have been an attachment to an audit. I want to say external audit, maybe a couple of years ago. So we have at least a beginnings of where we thought we were 2 years ago, or whatever that was done. And then we can come up with kind of, here's where we think.
Well, I think, I know that what accounts we have.
Yeah.
And what we can have, but, they're restricted. So, and I don't know if schools can commit. Can they commit funds?
What do you
Commit
mean by-
required, if you commit funds, it requires action on the board to commit the fund. And similar to a reserve, it requires action to use those funds, but they're not held in a restricted reserve. They're what they're called committed. Now, I know that municipalities can do that. I don't know if school districts can do that. So that was my question. Can we do that? Because otherwise, we have to find a way if we wanted to not use that up, if we wanted to be able to offset, because if we could, then most of the difference between what the lower estimated share and the higher estimated share can be absorbed by dividing that money up over the 15 payments.
It isn't ever a tool that I've heard used before, but we'll get a hold of our fiscal, we'll get a hold of state aid planning
Well, it's
and we'll see.
kind of the last hour, but,
Yeah.
but I mean, I think that's critical. I mean, we can't accept that and then just use it in the budget and have it disappear and then have to come up with those, bigger shares. It would, for me, use that money to offset that. So, did you also made some changes to our expenditures? Well, we give people time to think about.
Yeah, the only changes that I made were I put money back in for the 2 bus leases, and any changes that were asked in terms of salary increases. I think that's really about it.
So you moved you took out the line for purchase of buses.
So yeah, because we're leasing, it goes into contractual.
In contractual,
It goes
so
into
you
contractual
moved it
versus the
there.
purchase, yes. I added $40,000 into that line. I think I moved the money from a position that's not longer being filled into the, I moved it from one line to another for a full-time CSE director position, so I moved that money there, that wasn't being used in another line. And I addressed the salary increases for all the people that we discussed last week. It's all in the budget now.
Did anybody have any questions about the expenditures? Any questions? Heidi, any questions on the expenditures?
No, Ann.
So did you have anything additional on the projections, the 3-year projections or the summaries? So Dr. Glover, what's your recommendation?
It's the only when I walked in the door, my recommendation was the June payment for the larger piece, simply because cash in hand is better than one in the hand is worth better than 2 in the bush. Basically, we have it, we handle up front. It keeps that tax levy at 0. It does those things, recognizing that there are some other financial things in the end that we still have to pay attention to. But I fully understand where you're coming from. But to that point, and think we could work with that if that was, either way the board wants to will the board, but my lead is, we got the cash in hand, we can do it now. A little bit selfishly, I guess, it's easier to sell a budget that's at a 3% increase and a negative tax levy. and retains all of our staffing positions and includes the tax there. I think that's an easier budget for community to swallow, because we're doing all these things and everything is still low and we can say we're using it. So there's a lot of points in there that kind of make that approach easier, so I get that. As long as we just don't forget a couple years down the road, I doubt very highly we will, and from there, so. I guess that, just to help other board members, let's go back to, if I don't get to tell my grocery store an analogy every year, I feel lost. So we're in the store now, right? We have our shopping cart. We know people and teachers are important to us. They're in the cart, right? We know there. We know that remedial programs are in the cart. We're waiting for the coupon to come in, right? So they're in the cart. We know they're part of the plan. We know the health and wellness pieces are important. We've gotten those pieces in, and the money is in the budget. That is in the cart. We're just talking about how is next, but we know it's in there. So those things that we value as a district, those things that are a part of our goals as a district, are all in the cart. So now it's just a question of the taxpayer part. So that's the really piece to it. And it's, the one part of the taxpayer argument is keeping the levy at zero and getting rid of, the debt service and getting that ball rolling to help with that consistency for down the road. And the one hand, and then the other hand is we have the money now, we can give money back. I would change that translation to we aren't going to tax anybody because we already have the money. That's just really, which one of those do you want to put in the cart? Because the rest of this is actually a good problem to have. Because normally at this time we're talking about last year we were talking about gloom and doom and pre-K and all those things. That's not even, we haven't had said boo about that except for when that grant money comes in, what do we want to add? Now it's just a case of, are we comfortable with going with a negative tax levy balance and using that fund balance up front? Or do you want to hold off for one more?
Whatever we do, we still have to have a plan
Yeah,
for
agreed.
that money.
Agreed.
So that's a given.
Very much so.
We can't let that ride without having an articulated plan for where all of those dollars are going to get used. And if they're used in a fiscally sound way,
Mm-hmm.
I think you can tell people that we're using their money wisely.
And it's that, that idea if we can kind of, do some of that protection of that fund balance and that prudent piece down the road, it's not the kick the can down the road thing, right? It's not that we're not going to have to incur something more drastic. There's cost benefits to each side, but it's not like 3 years down, next year we're going to have to say we have to, whatever, negative. It's just we have to be mindful of it.
So you did put them on the scale and went back and forth and back and forth. Put your finger on one side. Which way are you going to go? Which way would you go?
She's talking to you.
You're responsible for bringing this budget to us, and
Yep.
so I want to know what you think.
It's in the start. The more cautious side of me is still we have the cash in hand. We know where the debt piece is. It keeps the levy at zero. It helps us keep keep those pieces consistent that are there. It is still a good use of taxpayer funds. We are not adding tax to the community at all for this first very large major payment, which is a one-time kind of glitch. The reserve money that's in the account is a one-time type of money glitch that's there. We still will have to come up with a plan for those reserves that are remaining afterward. So for there, I'm still at, we have the cash in hand.
And, you know, sometimes I just have to play the devil's advocate too, just to make sure that I know that I'm making the most informed choice that I can make.
Mhm.
And truth be told, I could live with either way, but for the sake of argument, one side versus the other. So just, you know, I do see your point in that. Anybody else want to chime in?
Point at
I'd be on
Jackie.
the
Yeah, I'm
spot.
still weighing.
Point at Jackie.
Still don't- I'm thinking.
I mean, there's large ramifications. It's hard that we're
Yeah.
up against it in order to make this decision. Because it would be nice to have some time to contemplate.
Yeah.
And to Dr. Glover's point, using the fund balance to pay that initial debt does free up money as we move forward and would give us more flexibility in the future.
Continue not to raise taxes,
Which would be,
Yeah.
you know, an admirable
you go out at
objective.
0 for 5, 6, 7 years in a row, that's pretty good in most communities.
And if that happens, then I will have achieved my goal. It's flat. However we get to it, you know,
Yeah, good. Oh, Bobby, you inhaled like you were gonna say
Yeah.
something. I thought you were gonna do it.
no, the eye on the prize is to keep the tax levy
That's right.
for the taxpayers here as stable as we can, for as long as we can.
Provide the best services we can for the
Going
children of the
forward.
district in a civically responsible manner, absolutely.
I mean, I think I just have a knot in my stomach about the negative.
Mhm.
Like, I just worry. So that's just what I'm thinking about right now versus a 0, which is, yeah. So I don't know.
It's too bad it has to work out like that,
Yeah.
because it really is not an action, it's just a matter of what day you paid on. And
Yeah.
it's not that we haven't paid anything.
Yes, yeah.
It's unfortunate that it has to come to that our revenue would exceed what our capital debt would be, so, and we have to take that 0, then it really impacts
Yeah.
our tax levy. That shows you how sensitive that formula is,
It's incredibly sensitive.
and it's so arbitrary.
Yeah. And on top of it, this year was actually under 2%, which is like the second time it's been that way.
I'm watching numbers.
So,
I like that.
Yeah. Likewise.
What was that, Dan?
Said I think I'm awash in numbers, and I like numbers.
Yeah, I understand how you feel.
So really, it's just, do we want to pay it in June, or do we want to pay it in July?
Right. No, it is interesting. Yeah,
And then we
that-
frame whatever we do based on that.
Right.
So we work from that point, rather than from working out back down to that. I think the best thing for us to do is decide if we want to go with that 0, leave us flat in the tax levy, okay, in June, and build a good plan for the use of that unappropriated money to cover those expenses
I
and.
think I'm most comfortable with that.
Dan?
With the plan, the structured plan for the,
agreed.
I would probably tend to agree with Jackie.
I would agree with that as well.
It's decided. No, I don't, I mean, I see both, I guess I see both sides. It's rare for me, I feel like it's rare for me not to be a little more passionate about one side or the other.
It's two good choices to have. That's not usually the norm. Usually it's a bad or worse, so.
Right.
No,
Yeah,
definitely
I mean,
good to see both positive, both positives on either side, so.
and
I actually can live with either one, but I just felt that for the sake of argument,
I think it was.
No,
good
and
growth,
I
though.
get it, cause I
Yeah.
understand both sides, cause I would like to do the July, it's just.
No, I'm very glad that you gave us the sake of argument so that we could see both sides. No, it was very good. Thank you, Ann.
Agreed. No, and I think that should, yeah, that, I would like that from the get-go, right, to actually have that, a robust look at it, to actually understand both perspectives, and not just assume that we're gonna go one way.
yes, that would have been helpful if we'd had that sheet when we were
Right
talking
from
about
the
the
get-go.
tax cap.
Right?
Yes, because we didn't have the context that we needed in order to make a good choice, because based on what we saw, it was a no-brainer, but when you see this, you know, supporting
Exactly, right.
information, it does change how that plays out.
Right. Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I could be, I could, honestly, I feel like I could be happy either way.
So we need to adopt the budget. What exactly do we need to adopt?
So on the agenda, we've laid out everything that comes up for adoption.
Oh, I didn't see that.
So in it is, you know, the adoption of the budget, which includes what that dollar amount is going to be. And, which then automatically correlates to what the tax levy is going to be. Because the June payment is the 0%.
If you could just give me a minute, please.
Oh, yep, sure. So, while Ann's gearing that up, the budget approval is separate, and then there's a series of ballot items. And I just got a couple details to ask you on some ballot items as we go through each of the ballot items for approvals for tonight. And then the approval of the election inspectors.
When was this added?
This was posted yesterday.
It's actually a little bit confusing at times when we get emailed some stuff. It's like, hey, that happened last meeting, that I didn't realize there was also stuff in Word docs separate from an email. I just need to, I guess I just need to.
Do you want me not to?
No,
email
no question,
this?
I'm not sure, I just wanna make sure that I,
Because I missed it too, because I was on yesterday and I did not see this.
right,
And I didn't know to look, go back and look.
Honestly, I didn't look at
Prepare
it
for
till
today.
at the meeting, and then I was like, oh, yeah, that's happening.
With the short time frames, I've just been trying to email as soon as I can and
Right.
then go.
Well, I think it's just the thing is if,
Board docs has been updated, just an on-call.
exactly, right, exactly. No, because I can appreciate getting the email, but I
I don't want to confuse anybody by doing it, so it's,
No, that happened to me the other day, and same thing, I happened to actually email just to make sure people knew, because I had been surprised for stuff in board docs, but I shouldn't have, and that's where stuff off. So,
You have the capital reserve fund capped at $1.5 million.
Say it again, sorry?
Be it resolved that the Board of Education hereby authorizes and directs to establish a capital
Yeah.
reserve fund.
Those are details we have to talk about.
Okay, because you filled it in with,
Yeah, I just filled it out with my suggestion.
last time you spoke about it, you said not to exceed $5 million.
Yep, that's what, I'm sorry?
You said $5 million.
Yeah, I did some rethinking on it and relook. We'll talk about it
Okay.
when we get there. Because my first number was wrong too. I originally said I thought it was 3 million and it was a lot less.
Oh,
So I went back and rechecked to make sure. Plus, I'm not sure if we're planning on doing another $20 million project in the near future. So I'm not sure we need to.
where's the first
That's, 2,
one?
What's number 2?
the bus.
plus,
Yep, so, budget approvals, item B, item C is actually for the ballot.
Annually over a 5-year
The
period.
bus is preposition number 2,
The capital reserve is 3, the student board member is 4, and then the library is 5. And then the last item is the recommendations for the election inspectors.
So we need budget approval. So we need 2 votes on the budget?
The first vote is on the budget itself, for what the budget is going to be. The second vote is on the proposition for the ballot,
Oh, I see, so that is the wording.
the wording for the ballot, yes. And that is items C, D, E, F, and G are all budget propositions. I mean ballot propositions.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And Ann, are you getting all the other group emails, like the board group emails that go out?
You know, I'm not sure that I do.
Okay.
Now, will we do isn't there a proposition for board seats, or will we just do that next?
That's actually, it's not a proposition for election, and we haven't approved that in the past. We checked, we haven't approved that in the past.
I did notice, I just went back to look, because I couldn't remember, when we did, here a couple of years ago, there was a proposition for Mary Bramer and Dunnigan.
What year did you get vote? What year was that?
Good question.
Was that last-
Must have been
Last,
2020, 21.
yeah, that was last year, because
Last
Mary's
year?
seat was empty. That was Ann, you were the write-in,
Yeah.
and I had the,
Is that,
You never read
is that,
those.
is that results or is that
no,
ballot?
that's,
No, that was a
Ballot,
budget
yeah.
hearing, that was presented at the budget hearing on June 2nd of 2020.
Yeah, but there isn't anything that has board action on approving a ballot item for,
There was a, yeah.
because it'll be in the newsletter and it'll be part of the presentation for the public hearing. Because we'll present on each of those ballot items. But anything that is money required the board approval to, plus the student seat because it's a board seat.
it changes the construction stuff.
Perfect.
But with the election, it's established. Which leads us back to June, July. I might have a quarter. Nope, I
Does
don't.
anybody have change for a dollar?
We can do a straw poll.
I think 3 people have said they were more comfortable with the June. And I'm-
Okay.
I'm not-
So Rich, what's our June number?
If you can pull it up, our June number, where would I got it here? June number is $15,631,195.
And that's at a 0% levy?
That's at a 0% levy.
All right, so we'll take each one in its order. Entertain a motion that the Board of Education adopt a proposed budget for the 2021-2022 school year in the amount of $15,631,195 at an anticipated tax levy of 0%.
So moved.
Second.
Any additional discussion? All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. Motion passed 5-0. Thank you. Entertain a motion to, this is the actual proposition for
Yep.
the budget bill.
Mm-hmm.
Adopt a proposed budget for the 2021-2022 school year in the amount of $15,631,195, and the spending plan be placed before the authorized voters of the district as Proposition 1 on May 18th, 2021.
So moved.
I'll do it later, I can second.
Yeah.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. Motion carries 5-0. C. Proposition D. Number 2. Entertain a motion to approve the following proposition number 2 for the 2021-2022 budget vote. Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Salem Central School District is authorized to lease 2 65-passenger school buses at a total cost not to exceed $40,000 annually over a 5-year period.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. Proposition 3. Entertain a motion to approve the following Proposition 3 for the 2021-2022 budget vote. Be it resolved that the Board of Education of Salem Central School District is hereby authorized and directed to establish a capital reserve fund which shall be used for future building projects and renovations. The amount of the fund shall not exceed $1,500,000. The probable term shall be 10 years, and the source of its funds shall be from excess fund balance.
So moved.
Okay.
Okay, we do need discussion.
Yeah, couple from my perspective, 2 details. One is dollar amount, is that $1.5 million, and 2 is the source of the funds. Okay? So on the dollar amount, the $3 million number must have been the number we were talking about years ago after we went through the first one about, because the first one we put out was only at $500,000, which was like my second year here, so it was like 2016. And after we got through, we decided it was too small, that we would have liked to have something bigger to be able to put more funds into. And so we talked about a dollar amount, and 3 million was the number that came up. But, so, that's why you don't see, that's where my 5 million came from, was our first one we felt was too small and wanted some room to expand. So, that changes number 1 to 1.5. The other part is one of the goals of our current project was to do the project to kind of catch up, right? And get a lot of the bones of the district done, and then start looking at smaller projects every 2 to 5 years, every 3 to 5 years, that are going to be smaller in nature, somewhere between $2 and $10 million, or wherever the board determines, to do smaller projects on a more regular basis in the district. If you're going to do that, you don't need as large of a capital reserve. You don't need a 3 million, you don't need a 5 million. That 1.5 should be enough, because if you do a $10 million project, you're still at 80%, 8 million of that, right, is gonna be aid, roughly, and then that leaves you with 2 million to worry about. If you have 1.5 million in a reserve, you can liquidate that reserve, and then you have only $500,000 to worry about over 15 years.
Make sense? So that was the thought process, kind of part two on the dollar amount. You can pick the dollar amount to present to the voters, and then the voters just have to approve it. It's just a number you're comfortable with, and looking down the road for future projects.
So I think that rationale makes sense. The only thing I guess would be that we at some point in the past, they probably thought they would do it more regularly and they weren't able to. And so,
Yeah.
does something larger make sense in the event that something like that would happen? Right, so you still have that intention, right? Same as whenever and you're not gonna end up with $3 million in that time frame. So I don't know what the right number is, but is that you can still have that mindset, but not paint yourself into a corner and not have that flexibility to do something different if it was not.
So are you suggesting in the range of $3 million?
Well, good question. So if we were thinking so that would give us the flexibility for something bigger, and it ended up being pushed out.
Yeah, because that gets you closer to 15 million in the
That pushes it
project.
out 50,
Right.
multiplied by 5. And hopefully that would be too big. But I don't think, the only downside would be if voters were turned off by a bigger number.
Mhm.
That would be your only risk. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any other risk of not getting close to that, right?
Right.
I mean, that's just putting a ceiling on it.
Right, that's just how much you can keep in there.
And remember, the capital reserve is one of the most restrictive reserves you can have. It's created by the voters. To use it, you need voter permission. I think there may be provision for emergency repairs. But there's very kind of strict, they have to follow, rules though you have to follow.
But you don't need voter permission to fund it each time you fund it.
Not each time you fund it, no. Just to liquidate it. If you're going to, or if you're just going to use money out of it. So it says for 10 years, and that's actually the max distance you can have the reserve in place before you have to have it renewed. So if you went out and had a $3 million in there, and you went out and did a $5 million project, you had enough money in there to cover that 20%. You can leave the reserve intact. You just have to ask the taxpayers to use that $200,000 or $250,000 out of the capital reserve to be applied toward your capital project. And if they vote yes to do that, then you still have your reserve, and the monies that are still there continues to grow. You can continue to put money into it until you hit that 10-year limit.
And then you just have to re-establish it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you have to reestablish, if it's just like a renewal for like the permission, or if you have to liquidate and restart to there. Because anytime I've ever had one, we've ended it for the project.
I think what you have to do is it has to go towards debt. You can't roll it over. You have to, it's been identified to pay for capital debt. If you have any left over at the end of your 10 years, it needs to be assigned to debt. And then you can start another one. You can't use those funds to roll it over.
I wonder what happened to voters too, because you have to, in 10 years, so if you have to get voter approval and you have to
Yeah.
use it in 10 years, but.
But it would allow
So,
you
it's not
to.
able to dime at all, just, it seems to me that would create more flexibility. And hopefully we would get to that
I think once
1.5
people,
and use it.
yeah, and I think once people understand that that money is there to offset the cost that's not covered by state aid, it's not the cost of the project per se.
Yeah.
It's the cost that we would incur if we wanted to go out and do a project. So it does, I think some people think, oh, you're only gonna spend $3 million. Well, that's not the case. That's our share of,
Right.
we were trying to cover our share of the project, so. But you're right, it is restricted, so, you put too much money in there, then you can box yourself in.
Right. Yes, and maybe 1.5 is fine. Really, again, we don't know exactly what's gonna happen on the road, but I think philosophically it makes sense to not wait and have such a big project, but work and stuff on an ongoing basis.
I mean, when this project is over, I would recommend that let's talk about what would need to be next.
Right.
And where the levels of urgency are, and then kind of build a plan with Mosaic on what should happen on a regular rotation, and we have some of that information already. To start with, some of it's left over from this last project that we didn't do, and some of it's been come up since we've done this project. And so, but to do it in smaller chunks and more regularly, makes a lot of sense.
So you said also the source of funds.
Yes, and the source of funds. What we have listed here is success fund balance. You can change that. It can be, you can say the general fund, unappropriated fund balance, building aid received from the state, or so on. You just have to identify it. I think from excess fund balance is generic enough, so you can choose where that comes from. So basically, we get our audited numbers in the summer. In August, when you go to set your revenues and do those different allocations, you'll have all those monies available to you to say, we want to move X number of dollars over. And from there. So that's the kind of the purpose there, is to keep it as generic as
So
we can.
that's the most generic version.
Yes. So it gives you more access to funds, remaining funds, than just saying, unappropriated fund balance. Because then you can only take your 4% and move it over.
And I think that people understand, sometimes you get into appropriate and unappropriate, people don't exactly see where that's coming from, but excess is when we have anything left over. So I like those clear. So what are people's thoughts about leaving the 1.5 million? If in the future, there does need to be a much larger plan, we can do another
Right.
capital reserve.
Just gotta go back out to voters and ask them to expand it.
That's fine.
So we will leave it as it is. All those in favor of the recommended numbers and money source for the capital fund, please signify by raising your hand. Entertain a motion to approve the following proposition number 4 for the 2021-2022 budget vote. Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Salem Central School District is hereby authorized to allow a Salem High School student be allowed to serve as an ex officio non-voting member of the Salem Central School District Board of Education, subject to the requirements of the education law.
So move.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. Motion carries 5-0. Jamie? Entertain a motion to approve the following proposition number 5 for the 2021-2022 budget vote. Be it resolved that the Board of Education of Salem Central School District is hereby authorized to increase by $584, I see, okay, $584 for a total of $29,775 annually, the appropriation to the Bancroft Public Library, and to add to the levy the necessary tax thereof, beginning with the 2021-2022 school year.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Just a friendly reminder that we are the taxing mechanism for the public library. This is not part of our budget. This is not increasing at the school, other than this is the library's request for us, and we are their mechanism to request and receive taxes. That's our part of our job.
Any further comment? All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. Motion carries 5-0. Entertain a motion to approve the following appointments for the May 18, 2021 budget vote. Sue Neal, Chief Inspector and Election Chairperson. Regina Eastman, Election Inspector. Lori Patrick, Election Inspector. Tina Beatty, Election Inspector. Marcy Armstrong, Election Inspector.
Second.
Any discussion? Of course, they don't have to do paper ballots this time, right? So they have
Nope,
enough inspectors.
the only paper ballots we'll get in will be the absentee ones.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of these appointments, please signify by raising your hand. Thank you, motion carries 5-0.
Have we determined a location for them?
We're going to go over to the high school. One of the classrooms immediately adjacent to the door. Over there. It's the circle's there, so we'll keep the circle clear. Yeah, clear for parking. It's handicapped accessible. There's not a long distance to travel. We'll just have to work that day on buses and student pickup and drop off. But when we were in the primary building, we had to worry about it there too. But I think that takes care of some of our access concerns we had with out front, and also the distance we had with the primary.
So is there anything else that we need to consider?
Not at this time.
Hey, we did it in less than 2 hours. Nice job. It's a workshop, but a motion to adjourn our workshop?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Thank you very much, everybody.